Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh and good evening. I am Azuhri bin Ashwaniza with the metric number of 2227757, and in this short video I will be discussing two major ideologies that shaped the second half of the 19th century, which are nationalism and liberalism. Let us start with liberalism. In the 19th century, liberalism was all about freedom, rights, and constitutional government. It promoted ideas like individual liberty, the rule of law, freedom of speech, and free markets. After the revolutions of the late 18th and early 19th centuries, especially the French and American revolutions, liberalism began spreading across Europe. Liberals called for governments to be accountable to elected parliaments instead of kings. They wanted laws to protect property and civil rights, and some even pushed for expanded voting rights. In countries like Britain, Reform Acts in 1867 and 1884 gradually extended voting rights to more men. Meanwhile, in places like France and Italy, liberal movements challenged monarchy and pushed for constitutional changes. But it is important to remember that 19th century liberalism was still largely led by the middle class. It didn't initially focus on helping the poor or working class. That will come later with socialism. Now let's turn to nationalism, another powerful force in this period. Nationalism is the belief that people who share the same language, culture, and history should live in their own independent nation. This idea helped inspire major changes in Europe. For example, Italy was unified in 1861, and Germany followed 10 years later, 1871. Both driven by nationalist leaders and movements. These unifications weren't just political, they were cultural too, as people started to feel a stronger connection to a shared national identity. But then again, nationalism was not always peaceful or unified. In large multi-ethnic empires like Austria-Hungary and the Ottoman Empire, nationalist movements caused tensions and conflicts. Different ethnic groups like the Czechs, the Serbs, and Armenians wanted their own countries, which often challenged the power of imperial rulers. Nationalism also became tied to pride and sometimes even aggression, laying the groundwork for future rivalries and wars in the 20th century. Prominent figures from liberalism in the 19th century include John Stuart Mill, the British philosopher who championed individual liberty, free speech, and women's rights, especially in his famous work On Liberty. Giuseppe Mazzini, though also a nationalist, was also a liberal who believed in democratic ideals and founded the Young Italy movement to unite Italy as a free republic. Alexis de Tocqueville, the French thinker, supported liberal democracy and warned about the dangers of majority rule in his book Democracy in America. On the nationalist side, Otto von Bismarck was the Prussian leader who unified Germany through war and diplomacy, using nationalism as a political tool. Giuseppe Garibaldi was an Italian military, a hero who led volunteer forces to help unite Italy and believed in national freedom. And lastly, Johann Gottlieb Fichte was an early German philosopher who saw a nation as a people united by language and culture. And his ideas helped inspire German nationalism during and after the Napoleonic Wars. In summary, both liberalism and nationalism were transformative ideologies during the second half of the 19th century. Liberalism pushed for individual rights and limited government, while nationalism focused on creating strong, unified nations based on shared identity. Together, they reshaped the political landscape of Europe, giving rise to new states, expanded rights, and a sense of modern identity that still influences us today. Thank you for watching, and I hope this gave you a clearer understanding of liberalism and nationalism.
Hi, my name is Mada Victorasti, metric number 2312214, and I'll be talking about the rise of socialism and workers' movement and the cultural shift from Romanticism to Realism. These changes were deeply connected to the effects of industrialization, and they helped define how people saw society, power, and even art during this time. Let's start with socialism and workers' welfare. During the 19th century, industrialization completely transformed the economy, but it also created serious problems for workers. Many people worked long hours in unsafe factories for very little pay. Child labor was common, and workers had no real rights or protection. In response, new ideas began to take shape. One of the biggest was socialism. It was a belief that economy should work for everyone, not just the wealthy few. Socialists believed that resources and industries should be controlled by the public and not just by the private owners. A key figure was Karl Marx along with Friedrich Engels. They argued that history was driven by class struggle and that workers need to rise up and take control from the capitalist class. These ideas inspired labor unions, strikers, and even political parties focused on workers' rights. The broader goal was not just better pay or hours, but a more equal society. This was a major ideological shift. It challenged the existing social order and sparked movement across Europe and beyond that would shape labor laws and politics well into the 20th century. While all this was happening socially and politically, there was also a big cultural change going on, especially in literature and art. At the beginning of the 19th century, Romanticism was the dominant style. It was a romantic art and writing focused on emotions, nature, imagination, and individual experience. It often idealized the world, but as the century moved on and industrialization revealed the harsh realities of life, Romanticism started to fade. In place came Realism and Nationalism. These new styles focus on everyday life, real social problems, and the struggles of ordinary people. Writers didn't try to make things look beautiful, but they tried to make them look true. One great example is Charles Dickens. He wrote about child labor, poverty, and the injustices of the industrial society in novels like Oliver Twist and Hard Times. Another is Leo Tolstoy, who explored moral and social themes in Russian society through epic novels like War and Peace. These writers use storytelling as a way to critique society and raise awareness, connecting art directly to real-world issues, much like the socialist movement were doing in politics.
Hi, Assalamualaikum. My name is Nurin Ain Zafira binti Narhamizi, metric number 22100602, and today I'll be discussing about two major forces that reshaped 19th century Europe, which is the rise of science and positivism and the beginnings of feminism. In the 18th century, Europe experienced a scientific revolution that dramatically changed the worldviews. Breakthrough by figures like Charles Darwin and Louis Pasteur introduced the new understandings of life and disease. Darwin's theory of evolution, published in 1959, challenged religious explanations of the creation, while Pasteur's germ theory helped transform medicine and hygiene. These scientific advances inspired a new philosophy, which is Positivism. Developed by Auguste Comte, he argued that only knowledge based on scientific evidence and observable facts could explain human society. This was a major shift from relying on religion or tradition to embracing science and rationality. Positivism influenced areas like education, public health, and even government policy. However, it also caused tension with religious institutions, as scientific thinking began to overshadow traditional spiritual authority. In summary, science and positivism led to a new belief in progress through reason, which is it shaped the way Europeans understood themselves and their world. At the same time, a powerful social movement was emerging, which is feminism. In the 19th century, women had very limited rights. They couldn't vote, they had little access to education or property, and they were expected to stay in the domestic sphere. But as liberal and socialist ideas spread, women began to push back. This period saw the rise of free feminism, which is a movement demanding equality in law, education, and politics. Women like Mary Wollstonecraft earlier inspired the cause, but later activists such as Millicent Fawcett in Britain worked for women's suffrage and better education. Education was key. Schools and college for women began to open, allowing women to enter public life and advocate for change. Feminism was also influenced by other movements, especially liberalism's focus on rights and socialism concerns for fairness. While women didn't gain full equality during this era, they laid the foundation for future reforms in the 20th century. The early feminist movement challenged deep-rooted gender norms and became an essential part of the modern European history. Together, science, positivism, and feminism reflect how 19th century Europe was being reshaped by reason, reform, and a growing demand for equality.
Hi, my name is Rosalina binti Ashman and my metric number is 2113746. I would like to touch on the other ideologies that emerged in the second half of 19th century. The ideologies that I'm going to talk about are aestheticism and decadence and also religious response. As for the aestheticism, the aesthetic movement centered on the principle of art for art's sake, rejected the idea that art must serve moral or didactic purposes, instead celebrating beauty as an end in itself. This movement sought to escape the ugliness and the materialism of the industrial age by emphasizing refined sensuous pleasure, eclectic inspirations from Renaissance, Greek, and Japanese art, and the cultivation of a lifestyle where life itself was lived as a work of an art. Key figures like Walter Pater and Oscar Wilde promoted intense aesthetic experiences and the pursuit of beauty as a spiritual ideal, often detached from the conventional social norms. Decadence, on the other hand, developed alongside and overlapped with aestheticism, took this idea further into a more radical and often darker realm, characterized by hedonism, self-focus, and a fascination with artificially excess and taboo subjects. Decadent artists and writers, including French symbolists like Baudelaire and Huysmans, expressed a profound disenchantment with contemporary society, using evocative language and exploring themes of decline and perversity. Together, these movements redefined art's purpose, emphasizing individual sensation and aesthetic experience over social or moral engagement, and laid important groundwork for modernist developments in art and literature. Apart from that, the second half of the 19th century saw significant religious changes as traditional churches faced challenges of scientific progress, secularism, and social transformation. Protestant churches, closely tied to state institutions, experienced declining influence due to the growing skepticism and the rise of secular ideas, but they also saw revivals inspired by Romanticism and evangelical movements that emphasized personal faith and social reform. The Catholic Church responded with a strong revival marked by renewed devotion, the rise of ultramontanism, which reinforced papal authority and increased engagement with popular religious practices, particularly involving women. Political upheavals such as the revolutions of 1848 further influenced the role of religion, with some governments supporting churches as a counterbalance to secular and revolutionary forces. Additionally, new spiritual movements and alternative religious ideas emerged, contributing to greater religious diversity. Overall, European religious culture during this period was characterized by a complex interplay between tradition and modernity, revival and secularization. The effects of aestheticism and decadence, as well as religious responses in the second half of the 19th century, were profound and interconnected, shaping cultural and intellectual life in complex ways. During that period, aestheticism and decadence deeply influenced culture by focusing on beauty and pleasure in art, rejecting the strict moral and practical values of the time. These movements encouraged artists to see art as an escape from everyday life and sometimes even as a new kind of spiritual experience, replacing traditional religion for some. At the same time, traditional religions faced challenges from science and secular ideas, but responded in different ways, where Protestants by renewing personal faith and social action, and Catholics by strengthening church authority and social teachings. New spiritual movements also appeared as people searched for meaning in a changing world. Aestheticism and decadence offered an alternative religion of art which questioned all religious beliefs and reflected the era's struggle between faith, doubt, and modern life.